Now let us clarify some dataset or simply table related terminologies. The first one is record. A record is an accumulation of all the characteristics of an object. In a tabular representation, each row basically depicts a record or an entire object. The second is attribute or variable. Each of the characteristics of that object is called an attribute or a variable. In a tabular representation, each column depicts an attribute. For example, let us say we have several rectangle objects in a tabular format. So let's say this is how my table look like. So here there is a serial number for the object. Let's say the rectangle 1, rectangle 2, something like this. Then there is an attribute of rectangle. Let's say we call it length or simply L. And also the rectangle have another second attribute which is called breadth, that is B. So length, breadth, all these things are basically attributes, or simply you can call them a variable. Whereas each row basically represent a rectangle object. For example, rectangle object 1 has a length, let's say 20, and the breadth is 30. Whereas rectangle object 2 basically has a length of 5 and a breadth of, let's say, 20. So something like this. So here basically each of these rows are representing a record or an object. So that's the definition of record and attribute. So the next thing is, what is a feature or input variable and what is an output variable. Now whenever it comes to machine learning, we need to predict some output variables, right? So here most of the columns in a tabular representation which acts as an input to the machine learning system are called either feature or feature variables or simply the input variables, whereas the column that you need to predict is called the output variable. For example, let's say in this rectangle table, length and breadth are the input variable. So there are basically two features, or let's say two input features in this table, which is the first one is length and the second one is breadth. Now let's say based on this length and breadth, we have something like we have to predict is its class. Let's say class means whether the rectangle is a big rectangle or the rectangle is a simply small rectangle. So that can be our output prediction. So this is just an example. So here this is our two feature variables are L and B, and these class columns, that is the output, is basically nothing but class, whether it is big or small. So this is the definition of or explanation of each different things in a tabular data set. Now, one thing you must remember in machine learning, that the input feature is the entire x-axis and not just one value. What does that mean in the table? Means this L, this entire column L is one input feature. For example, let's say X is one input feature. Then it can be written as like, let's say this X1, something like this. So then this entire column B is basically an input feature. So that can be your X2 for the input feature. Something like this. Do not think that each of these record like 20 or 30, these numbers are your input feature. No. The input feature is the entire column. Similarly, the output variable is the entire class column. It's not just a big or just a small. All right. So this is the entire output column. Class is basically this. Y is this the output variable. So now there can be multiple input features. As you can see in this table, we have two different input features or input variables like length and breadth as our x1 and x2. And on the other hand, there can be one input variable also. Let's say a partial tabular representation. We are just representing the length of the rectangle. So there can be one or multiple input features possible based on which you need to do your machine learning analysis or machine learning prediction. And also, so when it comes to expressing the ith value of the jth input feature, you can always use this type of simple notation over here. So xj, and do not think that these I as raised to the power, it is just an index. J and I both are index. So for example, let's say this L, I am assuming it as x1 as I noted here, and B is my x2. So if I just want to depict this 30, what should it be? So 30 should be something like, let's say x2, it is the feature number 2, and it is the first record, so that is 1 over here. Similarly, if I want to represent this 20, what should it be? Let's say this 20 means this column. So it should be something like, let's say this is my feature number 1, that is x1, and this is the 1th record. So this is basically the row number, and this number, this index is basically the column number to do some operations. So this is how we can easily denote, easily the show or easily access each of the data members in a table.